All right, let's go ahead and get started here. I'm not smart enough to have two monitors, so I'm going to be popping probably back and forth to look at the chat briefly. But welcome everyone to Acumatica with Microsoft Excel, Power Query, and Power BI. My name is Tim Rodman, and I'm an independent consultant focused exclusively on reporting in Acumatica. I'm not a VAR. I have no contractual relationship with Acumatica, but I've been around Acumatica for about 8.5 years, and now all I do is reporting. So that might be with dashboards, generic inquiries, pivot tables, report designer, ARM financial report writer, or increasingly, I find myself doing more work with Microsoft Excel, Power Query, and Power BI. I also run a website called augforums.com, and there's a lot I wanted to share with you there with what I have been doing and what I'm currently doing with specifically with Acumatica user groups, but I've only got 30 minutes. So what I did instead of doing an intro here is I recorded a audio recording, which is about 30 minutes. And that's all the stuff I wanted to tell you in this session, but didn't have time. So I'll share with you at the end of this a top secret page that you can go to that's specifically for this session. And it'll have my introduction that I wanted to share but didn't have time for. And it also will have the Excel file and the generic inquiry that I'm going to show you in this session. So with that, let's jump right in. And I'll pull up Acumatica, make sure I didn't get logged out here. All right. Now, what we're looking at right now is a generic inquiry in Acumatica. I think many people are familiar with generic inquiries. If you're not, they're all over the place. Usually when you go to a data entry screen, the first thing you see is a generic inquiry. And what's nice about them, they're real flexible. I can add as many columns as I want, and I can filter, I can sort. They're a real flexible way to get information. Now, what I find as someone who only does reporting in Acumatica is that many times when someone is asking for a report, what they're really just asking for is a way to get data like you see here, so they can do this. Click the most popular reporting button in any ERP system, not just Acumatica, and that is export to Excel. Now, the problem though, when you do that, if you export to Excel, is you're taking a static copy of the information. And I can pretty much guarantee you that when you do that, you're going to do something to it. You're going to filter it, add columns, do something before you actually use it to present information. So then the next time you want updated information, someone looks at what you created, they say, this is great, but it's 2 weeks old. So next time I need to refresh that information, I have to go through that same manual process all over again. So the first thing I want to show you is instead of exporting to Excel, I already built this Excel file for the sake of time. Now, also on that top secret page that I'll share with you at the end, I do have a link to a longer video. It's like a 70-minute video where I walk through how I built this from scratch, if you're interested in that. But for the sake of time, I already built something. And what I built is I built an Excel file that's pulling from the generic inquiry that we were just looking at. But what's cool about this is it's linked up live to Acumatica. So let's come down to this last invoice, 191. You can see it's got an amount of $50. Well, if I go back into Acumatica, go to that 191 invoice, change this to $60, save that. And then, oh, looks like that expired. Let me refresh there. I'll change that again to $60. I'll come back to Excel. So this was $50, but all I have to do is click this refresh button in Excel, and you'll see it runs in the background. It's retrieving data from Acumatica. And when it's done retrieving the data, you can see right here, now it's $60. Now, everything I just showed you is native to Excel. This is regular Excel. I'm on the cheapest version of Office 365. I think it's $8.25 a month, something like that. And a lot of people now have Office 365, so they've got access to this. It is native Excel, but there are two requirements for doing what I just showed you. One is you got to be on a recent version of Excel. It kind of depends on what you're doing when it comes to how recent. I think the simplest is if you're on Office 365, you've got access to the latest version of Excel. And then the second thing is that you do have to be on the Windows desktop version of Excel, not the Mac version, not the Excel Online version, Windows desktop version. So those are the two criteria. As long as you have that, you can do what I just showed you, and actually everything that I'm going to show you in this session for free. There's nothing you need to install. It's already there out of the box in Excel. Now let me do one thing. I forgot to turn this off. So let me go turn this off. Just ignore what I'm doing here, because your version of Excel probably does not have the feature enabled yet. So what I want to do is I want to show you how I built what you're looking at on the screen here and how it live connected to Acumatica. I'm going to go up here to Data, Queries, and Connections. I'm going to right click on this and choose Edit. Now, this window that popped up is the second thing in our session title. This is Power Query. So we looked at Excel. Now we're looking at Power Query. And you see it popped open a separate window, but everything you do in this window is saved in the regular Excel file. That's a file that ends with XLSX. You save it on your desktop, wherever you put it. Everything you do in this Power Query window gets saved in that file. So what I did here on the right-hand side, I'm not going to walk through building it from scratch. Check out the top secret page. I'll show you at the end to see how I built this from scratch. But I'll just give you the gist of it. You can see I connected to an OData URL. I then navigated to the generic inquiry that we were looking at in Acumatica. And then I started doing some of that stuff that you would normally do manually and that you'd have to repeat every time you want updated data. First, I can see that the date has 12 a.m. in it. It's always 12 a.m. because it's just a date. I don't need the time. So I changed the type on this to just a date. Then the next step down here, I replaced a null salesperson with Z none. And I did that so that salesperson would sort on the bottom. Then I did some filtering where I'm removing these are accounts receivable invoice lines that don't have an item description. And then I add a column called My Item. And you can see over here that it's just combining the item ID and the item description. And then I go add one called My Margin. So I build a margin amount based on the price and subtracting the cost. Then I change those types. I remove some columns. And then lastly, I filter to only get data January 1st, 2018 and later. So what's really cool about this is these are little breadcrumbs on the right-hand side. And I can click into here and see what the data look like at any step in the process. So here's where I added those columns, My Item and My Margin. But if I click back here to filtered rows and scroll to the right, you can see those columns haven't been added yet, which makes troubleshooting really easy, in my experience at least. I can go back when maybe there's an error that happens on one of these steps. I can go back to the step before the error and get an idea of where the error is happening. Now, everything that I do, all these steps, when I refresh the Excel file like I did previously, all these steps get applied automatically. And the data that gets loaded back into Excel is whatever data you see on the last step. So whatever happened up here doesn't matter. It's whatever is on the last step that actually gets loaded into Excel. So you might hit a generic inquiry that has 10,000 rows in it. You apply a date filter or some kind of filter that takes it down to 2,000 rows. You're only bringing back those 2,000 rows into Excel. So that's a quick tour of Power Query. Now, where I want to spend most of my time, because that top secret page I show you at the end will spend more time talking about Power Query if you're interested in learning that. I want to spend most of, or the rest of the time here on what I'm going to call Power BI. Now, if you've heard of Power BI before, you've probably heard what's called powerbi.com, which is a nice visual front end to the Power BI engine. But what I'm going to show you, standard native Excel, and it used something called the Power Pivot engine, which Power Query, Power Pivot, those are both parts of Power BI. And in my opinion, the real power in Power BI is the calculation engine. It's nice with powerbi.com to have some nice looking dashboard widgets, but the real power, in my opinion, is the calculation engine, which includes what's called the data model and the ability to create measures. So I'm going to spend some time showing you measures. But before we get there, let me show you how we can take this query that we wrote in Power Query, invoice lines with 7,751 rows, and how we can load that into the Power Pivot area. Now, Power Pivot is the original name for Power BI, and it lived in Excel for years before powerbi.com ever existed. So this is still there. Most people don't know about it. So I'm going to show you regular Excel functionality with Power Pivot, Power Query / Power BI. I jumble it all together and just call it all Power BI. All right, so first thing we're going to do is, you notice right now we've got this data loaded into sheet 1 in my Excel workbook. And if I go down to the bottom here, you can see I've got 7,752 rows. And if I go to the very bottom, you can see that Excel has a limitation of about 1 million rows. If you got more than that, you can't store it in an Excel sheet. But we can store millions and millions of rows in the data model area. So to do that, we come into this query, we go to load to, we change this to only create connection, and then we check this box to add this to the data model. Now this is the Power Pivot area of Excel by checking this box. I'll click OK. I get a warning that it's going to pull it out of my sheet, which is fine. Click OK. And now you'll see it's refreshing, again, pulling live data from Acumatica, except now, wait till it's finished here. Now it says it loaded those rows, but I no longer see them in my sheet because it's not stored anymore in the Excel sheet. It's stored in the Power Pivot window. Now to see that, you can come up to data here and click on this little icon. It's very well hidden. That's why most people don't know it's there. But you click on this, and this is why I disabled that add-in in the beginning. You'll get a prompt to enable the data analysis add-in. It's already in your Excel. You don't have to download anything. You just need to enable it by clicking this button. Now, similar to Power Query, we get another window that pops up. This one is called Power Pivot on the top. But just like with Power Query, everything that we see here and do here is stored in that XLSX file. So if you loaded millions of rows of data in here, you're not limited to the about 1 million rows that regular Excel is limited to. You could even have multiple tables of data. You could pull multiple generic inquiries together, and then you would relate them with this diagram view. And there's good reasons why you do that, but I'm not going to get into that today. But you can pull data from multiple sources, even Acumatica, maybe a marketing system, some other data source. But bottom line is everything you do here also gets stored in the Excel file. So even though I've got an Excel file that has an empty sheet, if I were to look at the file size, it would be potentially significantly larger than an empty Excel file because the data is actually stored in the Excel file. So here's where all those rows got loaded. There's my 7,751 rows. Now, the reason why I want to do this is it creates a lot more flexibility when I'm then going to analyze that data. And the real flexibility comes when you create measures, but also being able to pull in multiple tables and relate them together. That's also a reason to do it this way. So let me show you. Let's start off with a basic pivot table. So everything that I'm going to do is a pivot table. And the difference, though, between what I'm doing and a regular pivot table is I'm going to create it from the data model. So the data model is where I just loaded the data. And let's go ahead and drop a pivot table here. And let's go ahead and drag salesperson onto the rows. And I'll take the net sales and drag that into the values area. Then let's also put customer on the rows. So I get a nice breakout by salesperson, by customer. And then let me do some formatting. I'll go ahead and let's change the number format on this to that. And then I also, personally, I like the darker format. So I'll do that. And then I'll also get rid of my grid lines. And then let's rename this to just sales. And we'll call this salesperson and customer. All right, so pretty quickly there, we built a pivot table, and we can even do some sorting. Maybe we want to see the largest sales on the top. We also maybe want to see, let's see, if I go up to, the menu, if you notice, if I scroll down, I can't see the headings. So I usually like to freeze the top row, and I can still see the heading. And then in this pivot table window, I'm also going to show subtotals at the top, so I can see my totals by salesperson. And if I want to collapse everything, I can do this collapse entire field. And then I'm seeing the top salesperson, and I can easily go into a salesperson to see those individual sales. So I know I did that pretty quickly. I don't have a lot of time here, but I'm just trying to introduce you to pivot tables if you haven't seen pivot tables already. Key difference here compared to regular pivot tables, I'm not doing this based off of data that's stored in a sheet. It's data stored in the data model, also called Power Pivot, also generally speaking called Power BI. So then let's do just a couple other ideas on this. What I really like about pivot tables is it's easy to change your mind. I can slice and dice by different things. I'm not limited to, I don't have to rebuild a report if I want to change my mind with how I'm looking at the information. So let's say I want to see customer class up on the top. I just drag one thing off, drag another thing on, and very quickly, and maybe change this to just say salesperson, customer class. Very quickly, I'm now looking at sales by salesperson, broken out by customer class across the top. And the Excel file that you can download and the top secret page at the very end will have separate tabs down here for each one of the examples that I'm showing you, in case you're interested. And then I'll show you one more example. Let's put item class down here underneath the salesperson. And now I'm looking at sales by item class. Very quick, very easy to kind of explore the information and look at it different ways. Pivot tables are really good at that. But I want to use the remainder of the time to show you what I think is the real power in Power BI. It's not the visual front end. It's the ability to calculate numbers that never existed before in your organization. And you can do that with something called measures. So let's start off with a real simple example of a measure. We're just looking right now at sales by salesperson. Now, if I come down here to, let's see. If I come down here to the sales value and I look at the value field settings, you'll see that a regular field has about 10 things that I can do to it. I can sum it, count it, take an average, max, min, etc. But I'm limited to those 10 or so things. That's it. That's all I can do. Let's do the same calculation that we did with this first one called sales, except I'm going to add a new measure. And this measure, I'm going to call it my sales. And you see with the measure, I'm not limited to 10 things. I can write a formula. And the formula engine here is similar to Excel formulas. So in my opinion, it's something that if you know Excel formulas, you can bridge the gap from the Excel formula world to the measure formula world. But know that it is a different formula language. There's a lot more to it than just regular Excel formulas. So what I'm going to do just to start here is I'm going to sum up the invoice line's net sales amount. And let's show that as a whole number with decimals. So now if I scroll down on the right, you can see that I have a new field with an FX in front of it. FX is telling me that it's a measure. And let's add that to the screen. And you can see that I'm now calculating sales. Now I'm getting the same result as the sales column, but I did it with a measure. Now, in this case, I could have just used the sales columns. I didn't need a measure. But let's look now at some more examples of where measures start to get interesting. So I'm going to right click again and do add measure. And I'll call this one my sales over $5,000. This one I'm going to use some extra formulas here. Calculate. Cheating and looking at my printed notes here. Calculate a sum. Then I'm going to apply a filter on the fly that says only sum up the rows where net sales are more than $5,000. Make this a whole number with a comma in between it. Let's add that to the screen. And I think I'll go ahead and sort this by sales again. All right. So this is interesting because now I'm actually able to see a total of individual AR invoice lines where I'm only totaling up AR invoice lines that are over $5,000. And maybe I have an initiative where I'm trying to encourage the salespeople to sell our higher dollar items. And now I have a quick way to look at my total sales versus my sales over $5,000. And then let's do another one. Actually, I'm going to copy this formula. And then let's create another one here. My sales over $50,000. Just paste that and add a 0. I'll add that to our pivot table. Now I'm showing total sales over $50,000. And I can also use measures in other measures. So maybe I want to do my sales percentage over $50,000. You try to do this in a generic inquiry or an Acumatica dashboard, in my opinion, you're probably going to wind up writing a SQL view. But in Excel, using measures, I'm able to use a measure in another measure, which is very powerful. Brian, is that my 5-minute warning?
5 minutes. Yep, you got it.
All right. Okay. So we just added that and we format it as a percentage. So now maybe I have an initiative where I'm trying to encourage salespeople to make those higher dollar sales. And now I've got a way to calculate what percentage of their sales are over $50,000 broken down by salesperson. And what's really cool about a measure, I won't do it here, but I could drag on that item class, that customer class. I could do all that slicing and dicing that I was doing earlier, and the measures automatically calculate at the various levels. So it's very, very powerful type of analysis that you can do here. I'm just going to do 2 more examples in the remaining time I have of measures. Let's do last sale date. So this one's pretty simple. Invoice lines and date. Here's our last date. But then more interesting, I think, is last sale date amount. So I'm going to call this one last sale date amount. And this one's a little more involved. I'm going to use that calculate formula again. I'm going to tell it to take a sum of the net sales. And I'm going to use a special measure formula called last date. It's going to allow me to get the most recent date. Let's make that a whole number. So I now just calculated with a measure the total sales on that last date. So let's take a look at an example. We've got Eric here, and the last time Eric made a sale was August 10th. Well, what was the sale value? It was $95,000. To verify that, I can double click. It opens a new sheet down here. And let's go ahead and sort in descending order. You can see there were 3 invoice lines from August 10th. And if I go over here to the right and total up the net sales, there's my $95,000. I'm only touching the tip of the iceberg on measures. That's all I have time for. But I just wanted to give you an idea of some really cool things that you can do with regular native Microsoft Excel. Nothing that you need to purchase here, assuming you're on a fairly recent version, assuming you're on the Windows desktop version of Excel. This is all native Excel stuff that I just showed you here. Now, there also is a way to take this and go save it out into powerbi.com and embed that back into Acumatica. There's a $10 per user per month fee if you use powerbi.com and you want to embed it in Acumatica. So that's a whole nother topic. But what I just showed you here is just regular Excel. All right, now as promised, I'll finish up here by showing you the top secret page. So if you just go to augforums.com, it's actually not that top secret because I put a link to it at the top. You just click this and you'll see up at the top, here's the URL, acu-connect-2021. And I put a 30-minute or so, it's actually a podcast episode that I embedded on this page. And if you scroll down, there's also a link to a YouTube live presentation that shows you how I built this from scratch. I've also got some information on Power BI, and you can download that Excel file and download that generic inquiry. So that's all I've got. Thank you everyone for your time. And there's also a couple polls I put over there. If you want to jump into the poll real quick before you leave and answer my 2 questions. But thanks for your time.
Thank you so much. That was excellent.